Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I am back with another live stream. And of course, the focus is on the intense developments, the rapid developments occurring in West Asia, from Gaza to Lebanon, and of course, to this oncoming US and Israeli war of aggression against Iran. So we have a lot to get to, but I have two very special guests, and I'm going to bring them on right now. As you come on to the stream, everybody, be sure to hit the like button. That's whether you are on YouTube or Rumble. That's where we are streaming today. Be sure to hit the like button as you come on. Of course, hit the subscribe button. And you can also find all the ways to support this channel in the video description. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest. And out of two guests we have today, it is Laith Marouf. He is the founder of Free Palestine TV. You can find that on the video description as well. Just click the link right next to his name down there. And he's an amazing journalist. He is based in Lebanon, in Beirut. And we also have returning guest Lowkey. He is a prolific rapper as well as an activist and a journalist. He hosts the Mint Press News show, The Watchdog. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Great to be with you, Danny.
Great to be with you both. Thanks for having us, Danny.
Of course, of course. Well, I mean, where do we start? Because it actually has been a week of pretty massive developments on all fronts that Israel and the United States are currently waging a genocidal campaign. We have Hezbollah resurging, or at least apparently in the eyes of those who are outside of Lebanon, in the West, resurging. A massive drone attack on an Israeli base on Sunday. On Monday, sirens all across Tel Aviv because Hezbollah has been firing missile after missile, rocket after rocket in Tel Aviv. 2 million people in bomb shelters. We also have, of course, the UN troops, peacekeeping troops being threatened and fired upon over the past week. And of course, now we have in northern Gaza a resurgent genocidal campaign, images of Palestinians being burned alive in Al-Aqsa Hospital, which was housing many people displaced. And the United States, despite making threats on Netanyahu around an arms embargo, is sending a THAAD system as well as 100+ troops to Israel as this oncoming war with Iran appears to be heating up, even though now Netanyahu is walking back the threats of oil and nuclear targeting. So perhaps, Laith, we can start with you. Let's talk about these fronts. What is going on? Perhaps we can start with the Lebanon front. What is exactly is happening, and what does this indicate, given all of these very rapid developments?
Yeah, clearly the operations by Hezbollah have lifted any doubt in anybody's mind that they are still in control, that they are been able to recover from the Pager cyber terrorist attack and the assassinations of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and other military leaders within the Hizb. Seeing on the one hand that precise attack on the newly built secret base for the Golani Brigade, and having Hezbollah being able to gather enough information and intelligence to know when the officers are having a dinner meeting to hit them with that drone carrying 2 Hellfire missiles, and at the same time being a suicide drone, passing all the Israeli air defenses. And the daily operations on the ground here, where the Israelis haven't been able to move much on the border with Lebanon, going into 100 meters, 200 meters, and having to withdraw for 16 days now. That shows you that clearly Hezbollah has full control of the field, the battle on the ground. It also all its military, intelligence, and media structures are in full capacity. One last thing I would say is that the Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sayyid Safieddin, gave a speech today, and in it was clear that Hezbollah will not be stopping its defense of the Palestinian people, and that this is going to be a zero-sum game. There will be either the defeat of the Zionist colony or the end of all resistance in general. So we're going for the long game. There is no going to be any ceasefire, and Hezbollah is ready to bring the Zionist colony to its knees. In fact, the Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah used the words that Israel is a enraged wild beast, and that Hezbollah will put the leash on it and pull it back to its barn. Those are the words that he used.
Lowkey, please step in.
So I think Israel has a wrong-headed belief that by decapitating organizations, you demoralize the fighters on the ground. But the history of the Palestinian struggle says the opposite. When Israel assassinated Abbas al-Musawi in the early 90s with his baby and his wife, the assumption that the Israelis had was that that would be the end of Hezbollah. What then happened in 2000, they were defeated, and in 2006, with only, according to US military estimations, 3,000 fighters at the time, Hezbollah defeated Israel. There were 9,000 fighters in total, but many were kept in reserve. Of course, we're dealing with a different situation now with Israel's technological advancement far further than it was at the time. But even when you look at other cases, the entire group of the founders of Hamas, for example, have all been assassinated by Israel. And yet today, Hamas is still seemingly able to strike Tel Aviv, even after a year of Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. You look at the case of the PFLP, Ghassan Kanafani was assassinated in Beirut in Golda Meir's Operation God's Wrath, in which they killed him and his teenage niece, Lemis. But after that, the PFLP went on to carry out the highest level assassination of any Israeli minister throughout this long battle with the Zionist entity, Riv Havam Ze'evi, who was the Israeli tourism minister at the time. You also have the case of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Fathi Shiqaqi was, of course, assassinated also, one of the key founders and the Secretary General of the PIJ at the time. And the PIJ is fighting against Israel until this day. So this attempt to demoralize the rank and file by taking out the leading figures and symbolic figures within movements has simply not been successful for Israel. And as I always mention, is the case of Izzeddin al-Qassam. If this policy was right-headed, you would not currently have today fighters fighting the Israelis who use the name of the fighter that the British assassinated in 1935. Actually, this policy is shown to lead to the opposite, in that it inspires many more to come forward to fight the Israelis more. And Israel cannot afford a war of attrition in Lebanon. And for that reason, I would say it's seeking to drag in the United States even further. It would try and encourage civil war in different parts of the resistance axis in order to escape having to be on the ground fighting with the fighters in Lebanon. Hence, you have seen this strike in the north of Lebanon just yesterday, in which they are attempting to pit those who have been displaced from the south in an oppositional position with some of those in the north who may be of a different denomination. The idea of a society which is non-sectarian, which is what Lebanon could be if it were not for external meddling, is completely antithetical to the idea of Zionism, because Zionism is in itself the epitome of a sectarian idea. It's the idea that Jewish people cannot be one with other societies they are part of. They have to create their own ghettoized entity, which is in a permanent state of aggression against the indigenous people within the place it is. But also within the Zionist movement, you have a heavy expansionist elements who are seeking, in their completely deluded state of mind, to think that they can build settlements in Lebanon, for example. We at Mint Press traced in the last year that many of the organizations who are jockeying to build settlements in Gaza, for example, have funding not only from US charities, which are tax exempt, but even from US government institutions and local administrative bodies in the United States. So this is raw settler colonialism that hasn't been seen really in the rest of the global South since the process of decolonization. You haven't seen this level of raw, naked European settler colonialism, which Israel is attempting to impose on the region as a whole. Israel has fantastical maximalist aims, which are simply unachievable. It wants to reconfigure the entire political system of Lebanon. It wants to take control of the education system and have curriculums which inculcate the population with the idea of normalization. This is really an attempt at normalization at the point of a gun, at the point of F-16s, F-15s, and F-35s. Israel will fail the longer that this continues.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And Laith, I want to bring you back in here because as Lowkey was talking about these maximalist aims, it made me think about this recent absolutely, it's almost absurd, this idea, this UNIFIL confrontation, Israel literally firing upon, having Merkava tanks firing upon UN peacekeeping troops. Now, UN peacekeepers actually have the capacity to strike back if they could. It seems like there might be something holding them back. I wonder if that's Washington. But Laith, I wanted your take on both this and also the significance of this drone attack that Hezbollah just waged, because on to the points that Lowkey was making, there was such a bluster after that on social media. It exploded. There were rumors of the IDF chief of staff being killed. It seems like he was not, but I think it was a huge blow to the confidence that Israel has been trying to sow with these maximalist aims it has over the course of these terrorist attacks. What do you make of it?
You see, October 7th demolished the Jewish supremacist ideal within Zionism. Zionism was telling the world and its followers that they are the chosen people, they are the best scientists, they're the best intelligence, they're the best military, everything is best. And October 7th came and destroyed this base of the identity of Zionism. And since that day, the resistance also in Lebanon, demolished this superiority within the settler colonial group and those in the West that believe in Zionism. And so the Pager cyber terrorist attack and those assassinations and the throwing 85 1-ton to 5-ton bombs in the middle of Beirut was an attempt to reassert supremacy, not only in the mind of the native indigenous people in the region, but also in the mind of the settlers themselves, the colonists themselves, and all the Western backers of this colony. It was supposed to reassert that. And what we've seen in the last 2.5 weeks almost is the inability of the Zionists to achieve any military gains in Lebanon. The fact that Hezbollah is fighting inside the frontline villages that are militarily fallen, that are in valleys, that are supposed to be in a regular military strategy. You would withdraw from that zone, allow your enemy to take it over, and then bombard them from the air. by missiles and rockets. But Hezbollah is refusing to let these fallen territories, militarily fallen territories, to actually be captured by the Zionists, and is fighting for every inch. Why? Because they don't want the Zionists to have the ability to raise a flag on top of a Lebanese village and reassert supremacy. Okay, and so now we are seeing the fruits of Hezbollah's ability to stand where it is and to continue this fight. We're already seeing those who were within the support of the anti-imperialist camp that were demoralized after the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and his martyrdom now being reinvigorated. We're also seeing the demoralization happening again of the Zionist public, and the achievement, you see, like most people didn't understand the point of the last Hudhud or Hoppo video that came out just before the attack on the Golani base. People were like, oh, well, it's another video that's just threatening Israel. Well, it wasn't really a video about threatening Israel. It's a video that was to show that Hezbollah is in full capacity to infiltrate the Zionist colony, to collect information and intelligence, and also its propaganda arm is still in full health. And here we go, they delivered with the drone attack. And this was a special drone attack because it was a drone that had 2 Hellfire missiles on it. And it was also a suicide drone. So this is a kind of warfare, drone warfare, that we haven't even seen in any other military zone. So it shows that Hezbollah is in control, can collect information and find a target and hit it, and that the Israelis can't stop any of these attacks. And I think because Hezbollah has been bombarding Tel Aviv on a daily basis, Israel stopped the bombardment of Beirut for the last 5 days, because originally, the Zionists were attacking the southern suburb of Beirut, the Dahieh, and Hezbollah was trying to assert a new formula, well, Dahieh for Haifa. But the Israelis, instead of agreeing to this formula, decided to attack Beirut proper, just a few, less than a kilometer away from the parliament. Okay, they attacked inside Beirut. And that's when Hezbollah was like, okay, we're going to attack Tel Aviv now. And it seems like the Israelis retreated from and now have accepted the limitations that Hezbollah has forced through its firepower.
Yeah, Lowkey, any follow-up?
Well, you mentioned the apparent standoff with Irish peacekeepers. Israel has a history of attacking UN sites. Even in Gaza, by January this year, near 70 attacks on UN sites in Gaza were recorded by the Israelis. Netanyahu has described the UN as a house of darkness. And you have to remember there are clear racial implications about what he's saying. At the beginning of the genocidal campaign on Gaza, Netanyahu referred to the Palestinians as children of darkness and the Israelis as children of light. We, of course, know that when you look at the UN member states, you are looking at vast majority of them coming out of decolonization, vast majority of them from the global south. And Israel, and specifically Netanyahu, as somebody whose father was very close to Jabotinsky, Vladimir Jabotinsky, who Netanyahu essentially views as a inspirational figure, and Jabotinsky was somebody directly inspired by Mussolini and European fascism. And of course, you have to remember that there are more streets, cinemas, hospitals, roads, parks named after Vladimir Jabotinsky than any other Zionist figure in the history of the movement. So, of course, there is this antagonism between Israel and the rest of the world, which is only increasing by the day. And, many of people in the world understand what has happened in Gaza as the best of humanity being killed by the worst of humanity while being watched by the rest of humanity. And it is worthy of note that those who have the least have given the most, and those who have the most have given the least when it comes to the story of Gaza. And it is precisely Lebanon's refusal to let go of Gaza's hand and allow it to drown. It is precisely Lebanon's stubbornness in a positive way to make sure that the Israeli campaign on Gaza would be lightened and weakened by drawing it to the northern front with Lebanon. And that in and of itself will stand in the annals of history as a supreme the definition of altruism, the definition of what they call in Arabic nakhwa, shahama. These are the qualities that have been required for individuals, entities, organizations, and states to truly stand with Gaza at this time, because it has been a known fact that there would be negative consequences for doing that. In Lebanon, long before the pager terrorist attack, it gave over 500 of its youngest, its best, its brightest individuals to try and help Palestine. And those people were sacrificed for the greater collective good in the understanding of those in the region. So really, we are in a new phase of what is an epic war. If Israel genuinely wants to achieve these unrealistic aims, it will need, this war will go on for longer than a decade. And you will see people drawn into Lebanon from all over. I would, of course, be interested in Laith's perspective on what he views as the likely time span we're thinking about with this. But probably what's more likely is Israel will fail to meet its objectives, as it has failed in Gaza, and it will be more likely to withdraw from Lebanon sooner. But I would be interested to hear Laith's perspective on that.
Look, you know, there is always highs and lows in how we can analyze depending on of the event of the day. But honestly, I can, in my opinion, I believe this war is not going to last more than a year from now. And there will be no Israel a year from today. And I'm not saying this lightly or, boasting or, dreaming. We know from the ground, first off, the Israeli military on the ground in Gaza is defeated. It hasn't been able to hold any ground. It has to keep on going in and out. And here in South Lebanon, it's already been defeated. We know that the Israeli air defenses are defeated by the missiles of Hezbollah, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran and their drones. We know that the Israelis are running out of air defense missiles. That's part of it why the Americans are bringing a second batch of THAAD air defense systems. Just to be clear, the Americans already had put THAAD missiles around the Israeli air base in the south of Palestine, the most important air base, and they put THAAD missile defense systems inside occupied zones of Syria around the Conoco oil fields. This was 6 months ago. So the THAAD systems failed during the 2 Iranian attacks. And if we watch the video from the October 1st retaliation by Iran from the 40 somewhat missiles hitting that airbase, you can ascertain from the video that the THAAD system was being blown up in front of our eyes, the radar systems of it and the batteries. So the only reason that the Americans are bringing another THAAD system into the Zionist colony right now is because the Israelis are running out of Arrow and David Sling's missiles. They can produce just a few hundred of them a year, and if they ran out of them. So, and it's just for show, because again, the THAAD systems were not able to stop the barrage of missiles from Iran. Now, once we understand that the Israeli military on the ground is defeated. Its abilities in the air defenses are defeated. The only thing that is left is its air force. And as we saw, the Americans sent in 20 somewhat new F-35s with their pilots, because the Israelis don't have enough even pilots to fly those F-35s. That means that the US is already getting more and more directly engaged, openly in this war. So in the situation of the Zionists attacking Iran now, and Iran retaliating, and all of the axis of resistance retaliating, the US will be drawn in directly. And so we're talking about this window in the next two and a half weeks before the American elections, that we will see ourselves in a regional war. Okay? Netanyahu is not going to wait for the American elections. He wants to guarantee that no matter who gets elected, they will be already drawn into a war that they cannot pull themselves out of. Now, put it in this perspective, if the US is involved in this war and there is no nuclear weapons used, I don't think there will be nuclear weapons used, then it means it's already foretold. The Americans cannot sustain heavy casualties. We said that about Israel before October 7th last year. Maybe that, now it looks like the Israelis can sustain heavy casualties, but the Americans, I don't think the public has been used to sustaining heavy casualties since Vietnam. Okay, so a war will end within a year. It could end with either the collapse of the Zionist colony and with the withdrawal of the Americans from the region, and there will be no Israel. And also the other option is there will be no Israel, but there will be no humanity, and all of us under a nuclear holocaust will be gone. But for sure, within the next year, there will be no Israel. Either we all are not with it, or it doesn't exist on this planet. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, it feels, I mean, what we are seeing is certainly the struggle, the resistance war, as well as this genocidal campaign by Israel reaching ahead right now. And Lowkey, I wanted to bring you in because it appears Netanyahu has walked back his threats to hit Iranian nuclear and oil sites. The U.S. claims they're relieved. They also claim that they are threatening an arms embargo on Israel for what it is doing right now in Gaza, where you have U.S. politicians seemingly asleep for a year, witnessing the horrific images of Palestinians being burned alive in Al-Aqsa Hospital. I'm curious on what you make of this current reality that Israel and the United States faces, because on the one hand, you have the United States threatening a so-called arms embargo, and on the other hand, you have them literally arming Israel to not just, mass murder Palestinians, but also prepare for the regional war that Laith was talking about.
Well, I can categorically state that the United States will never operate an arms embargo against Israel under any circumstances. If you trace back US public statements since the beginning of the genocidal campaign in Gaza, all they have equated to is PR and perception management. These are time-buying tactics by the US, who have a well-established background in psychological operations in terms of manipulating perceptions of the public. And again, this is what a lot of the younger generations would call gaslighting. They are attempting to depict a different reality than as is on the ground. As Laith has just pointed out, the US literally sending its own pilots along with the F-35s to help Israel in strikes. The Intercept revealed about 6 months into the Gaza campaign that there were US Air Force officers in the operating rooms with the Israelis helping with targeting. So this is a US war on the region without a doubt. I think the interesting question is how that may or may not be affected by whoever wins the presidential election. I mean, when you look at somebody like Donald Trump, this is an individual that John Sawyers, the former head of British external intelligence agency MI6, said Trump was easily the most manipulated US president Israel has ever enjoyed. He recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights, which no other country has done. Trump's proposal for a solution to Palestine were largely written by the Israelis. Now, he's not wrong. You know, in the case of Joe Biden, we know that his script on Israel is being written by Israel lobbyists like Chaim Saban, and now Biden is essentially lost absolute control of his mental faculties. It's really probably run by the US military in terms of their decisions. But essentially, you've got the US military and the British military and the Israelis working as one hand in the region. When it comes to the pronouncements of political figures, these are largely about PR and affecting people's perceptions of what is happening. Trump has come out with interesting statements vis-a-vis the PR side of what Israel is doing. He said, I hate that they put out tapes all the time. Every night they're releasing tape of a building falling down. They shouldn't be releasing tapes like that. They're doing it, and that's why they're losing the PR war. They, Israel, are absolutely losing the PR war. But an interesting aspect of the Trump story is, of course, the funding that he has received from Miriam Adelson. Now, Adelson is the wife of the late Sheldon Adelson, somebody who was historically one of the largest, if not the largest, funders of Israeli settlements. He was also someone that had quite an interesting role in the case of Julian Assange, whereby Adelson was able to harness the Spanish security company, which was in charge of security at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He was able to commandeer it for the CIA. So clearly Adelson is both an Israeli and a US intelligence asset. But after he died, his wife then took control of the many billions that he had, and she has used it to push Trump with a new injection of hundreds of millions of dollars for his political campaign. So it's thought really that Trump will go even further. And one of the conditions she has apparently had with Trump is that he would recognize Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank immediately if he were to come in as president. Trump has also stated that he would seek to strike many different sites in Iran, civilians, implying he'd want to strike nuclear sites. It's unlikely Trump will win at this point, I would say, but it's not impossible. I think the US deep state has forced back control of the narrative, but I do think it will be close as to who will win. But either way, escalation is likely. I don't take anything that either the United States or Netanyahu and the Israelis say at face value, even if they are for now saying they are pulling back from the idea of striking Iranian oil or nuclear facilities. One day they will. And then the ball will certainly be in the court of the resistance axis, and specifically the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yeah,
well, it's interesting.
Anything that Israelis or Americans say, I would believe the opposite. So when they're saying they don't want to attack, I would say, "Oh shit! Oh, sorry about that." Wow, they're gonna be attacking it. That's really like what I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you both are saying. I mean, Laith and I, Lowkey, before we began the program, we're talking about it's kind of the feeling of some. When I see things, I'm in the United States. When I see what's going on in Lebanon, when I see what's going on in Gaza and Palestine, when I see this march to world war by the United States in particular and Israel, of course. I was raised by a military man, and I get angry, and I'm like, ooh, I start thinking, these thoughts, the Fanon catharsis theory on violence, like this is gonna happen. It's gotta happen. And as you said, the ball would be in the resistance's court if Israel decided to do the unthinkable. And I think you're exactly right, Lowkey and Laith, that we can't believe anything they say, and we also know that the outcome of this is war against Iran. So I'm curious, Laith, given this, we've seen Israel now refocus its attention on Gaza. Of course, it's been committing atrocities there and genocide over this past year, but even just on the military front, now it's saying it's got to go back into northern Gaza. It's got to take out the resistance. It's got to continue operations and intensify them. What does this say, though, about Israel? Because, I mean, this was supposed to be over and done with there. Actually, there were talks during the whole assassination of Nasrallah, the pager attacks. Well, actually, the real war is on Hezbollah, and look how much we're winning. But it seems like they are increasingly bogged down in Palestine and attempting this campaign of, well, if you can murder the civilians, if you can get rid of them all, as many as you can, then eventually the resistance will die. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, look, they are taking out their frustration on the unarmed population in North Gaza, and it's their plan to ethnically cleanse the north of Gaza and take it over is already failed. They've attempted and they've done it already multiple times, but now the population inside North Gaza is refusing to leave. The other thing is that the capabilities of the resistance in Gaza is still intact. Every day, you can watch on Free Palestine TV, we translate all the operational videos from the ground, and there's always, every day we have 7 to 12 videos we have to produce and translate, and that show in every one of those videos you see attacks on tanks, APCs, you see attacks on the command and control centers, you see booby traps, you see and very close range battles. So it's clear that the Israelis cannot hold ground, and that the Palestinian resistance has the capability to reach every part of Gaza still, and has enough weapons and munitions to continue this fight. The last statement we heard from one of the spokespersons of Hamas was that Hamas can fight another 2 years. This is how much ammunition it has and how much more actually people have volunteered to be members of Hamas, that they have actually gained more militants since the beginning of the war than they had before. And that is because every person in Gaza has a family member, or maybe the whole family of them, been genocided, and everybody wants to fight the Israelis. This is also happening here in Lebanon. The assassinations of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and the purposeful targeting of medical staff, medical facilities, the targeting of churches, the targeting of civilian infrastructure that is supposed to actually scare people and push them away from Hezbollah, is actually pushing them closer and closer to Hezbollah. There's now, we're hearing statements from even the Maronite church that is now captured by the Vatican and has been kind of appointed their archbishop by the West, is itself making statements about patriotism and ending the aggression on the country, and even called Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah a martyr. So that is all the plan of the colonizers, the imperialists, which is actually at the core of it, is the attempt to break the will of the people and to make the people go down on their knees and prostrate themselves and say Zionism is rules, and that there is such a thing as a chosen people and we're not it, and that our religion and our God are not true, and only those things are actually backfiring. And we have to understand those videos that Trump was complaining about Those videos are purposefully released by the Israelis, including the video of the gang rape of Palestinian prisoners. People think that it was just leaked. No, it was released on purpose. The purpose of it is to get the Palestinians and the Arabs in general to feel so demoralized, to know they're telling us, we will rape you in front of the camera, gang rape you, and nobody can stop us. We will burn your children live on camera. We will have a broadcasted Holocaust, and no one can stop us. Those are all intentional. Those destruction of homes, clearly, or killing of civilians that are walking with their filmed from helicopters and drones, those videos are released on purpose. Again, because it's the intent is on the one hand to make the Zionists feel that they are God, not only the chosen people, that they can do anything they want to. That's to their own core, and to the Palestinians, Arabs in general, and Muslims in general, to make us lose faith and give up. And but as we know from the history of this region, there's been many empires that came here and claimed the same claim that the Zionists have claimed. Remember, 1,000 years ago, a millennia ago, the European kings and queens, led by the Pope, said that these European kings and queens are the descendants of Jesus' disciples, and they are the chosen people, and they have the right to Palestine, and they have to cleanse it of the Muslim invaders to bring the Messiah back, to bring Armageddon. Those were the words of the Pope. And what we hear today is the Zionists saying they are the chosen people, these European descendants of converts to Judaism, claiming that they have the pure blood, that they have the will of God on their hand, and that they will cleanse this land of the invading Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, and bring Armageddon. And what happened 1,000 years ago? It ended with the defeat of the whole hordes of Europe. Okay, not only these the garbage of Europe that the Zionists are. No, the whole hordes of Europe were here, were cannibalizing people. You know, they were actually cannibalizing Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians, the Crusaders. Not only burning them on live television, they were cannibalizing our children, making whole barbecues of them. It's all recorded in the records of the church, the Catholic Church. And so what happened in the end? In the end, the choice was given to these crusaders. You have three choices only. You can accept equality, stay in your home or you're holy in your temple, and nobody will touch you.
Anything that you want to add?
Well, Danny, you mentioned the ramp up of war with Iran, and really what you have seen since the coup against Mossadegh in the 50s, led by the CIA and MI6 at that time to bring in the Shah. This was, quote unquote, the White Revolution, in order to make sure that Iran couldn't nationalize what was then called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, but then went on to be BP. We have seen the entire development of US military bases in the region has been based on building up for a final confrontation with Iran. Because at the time in 1979, when the Iranian Revolution took place and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan happened, the US did not have permanent ground troops in the region. And so according to those in the US military elite, they saw it that they were not able to respond in the way they would have liked to. For example, when they failed to rescue the US captives from the US embassy, it really emphasized this limitation. At the time, the only permanent US naval base close to the region was Diego Garcia, which was in the middle of the Indian Ocean. What you have seen since, for example, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, which led to the Gulf War, of course, the US were able to occupy bases throughout the region. But the speed with which that took place implied that there had been years of planning for this kind of mobilization. Of course, during the Nixon period, you had what they called the Nixon Doctrine, which was to build up Iran under the Shah and Israel as these pillars against Arab nationalism, and there wouldn't be a need for these massive US bases that you have today. But then you had the Carter Doctrine, the Jimmy Carter Doctrine, and they developed what was the Zagros Mountain strategy, which would be the way the US military envisioned it, a method of invading Iran and seizing these vital mountain passes. During that time, Oman and Kenya gave the US access to bases in exchange for military aid, but there wasn't that much progress in the region. And then you had the Ronald Reagan election in 1981, and the US built what they called strategic consensus. This was something that they wanted to build throughout the region, that Iran was an enemy that needed to be faced. And so you had this constant threat inflation and fear mongering visited upon particularly Gulf governments, that they needed a US presence in order to face off Iran. And, you know, it's often forgotten that the International Court of Justice in 2003 ruled that the action of the United States against the Iranian oil platforms in 87, what they called Operation Nimble Archer, and in 88, the Operation Praying Mantis, cannot be justified as measures necessary to protect the essential security interests of the US. So these operations that the US carried out were carried out with the involvement of US naval bases in Oman, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Diego Garcia. And so now this situation in Palestine and now in Lebanon is no doubt being used to ramp up into the direct confrontation with Iran. But while we can say that Iran's approach has been to strictly hit military sites, if, let's suppose, Iran was to strike energy platforms, was to strike infrastructure, was to strike the electricity sources of Israel, you would find a entity which is essentially the size of Wales or New Jersey in a very, very difficult position, literally overnight. And that is something that is in the capability of Iran, certainly. Of course, if the Israelis and the Americans deem it suitable to strike the oil facilities of Iran, then of course the Yemenis have said, the Iraqis have said that the oil facilities in the Gulf will become a green target and can also be struck. And that will lead to really massive ramifications for the global economy. And you will find a lot more pressure being exerted by the economic situation on the US to rein in its mad dog, Israel. And as has been made clear, Israel excels at the least ethical methods of warfare. What you've actually seen is those fighting Israel mainly, but for the main, have targeted military sites. What you've seen with Israel is the vast majority of strikes that Israel has carried out has been on civilian sites. And so really you see this question of a compass, a moral compass in the approach to this war as being clearly indicating that the axis of Israel, the United States, Britain, with the involvement of Germany, with the involvement of Canada, is really just beyond all measurement of decency and human decency. So the more Israel carries this on, and the more it attempts to impose itself in this way, we have entered the phase of imperial Israel. This is the phase where Israel is attempting to directly rule with air supremacy the region. The longer it attempts to do this, the more and more naked the emperor will become, the more shorn of pretensions it becomes, the more hollow the PR rings around the world. And the vast majority of humanity are post-colonial subjects who view themselves as emerging from a decolonial process. They do not see themselves reflected in this European colonial settler entity.
No, that's incredible points, Lowkey. And I wanted to bring it back to you, Laith, because I'm curious what Lowkey has been saying, and it made me think about just all of the ways in which Israel has attempted through its massacres, its genocide, to promote this image of just endless power, right? It's able to control both the narrative and the situation in the region through this very cruel, incredibly cruel, and just absolutely heinous campaign. That should all make us angry, but I think on the one hand, you know, it's supposed to send a message to the resistance that they can't win. But I think on the other hand, it sends a message to people outside, especially in the West. There has been a lot of anger toward Israel and the U.S. support for Israel, Western support for Israel. But at the same time, there's also a lot of consternation about, well, can Israel actually be restrained? Can it be defeated? And on the other hand, we've seen just this resistance continuing to mount and also get more powerful. Hezbollah, despite all of these hits on Hezbollah, more powerful, I believe, and they're saying they are. They're saying they're conducting record operations against Israel. The Palestinian resistance has not been defeated. Yemen has been able to strike into Israel. The Iraqi and Syrian resistance has been able to do similarly. And of course, you have Iran in this conversation about a war. Operation True Promise 1 and 2 have sent a big message. So I'm curious about the mood, Laith, where you are in Lebanon. And I don't know if you've had a chance to travel during this time, but I'm curious about how this has affected the region, people's assessment of the situation, and how much that comports with the reality that we've been talking about here.
Yeah, well, now, since the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, in the beginning, people were in a sad, somber situation, you know, and you could feel it in the streets. But now it's moved beyond that, and especially the glorious actions of Hezbollah, their operations in the last 16 days have reinvigorated pride and hope, not only in Lebanon, but I think in the whole region. And I want to say, you know, beyond those details of what's happening on the ground that show us that the Israeli military is already defeated, there is the issue of, you know, wars are fought on geographies and are fought with populations. And so you need to always assess the two parties, the conflicting parties in those broad terms first. And so Israel is a small, tiny state that is only on the sea, and around it are 600 million Arabs with huge territorial continuity, and behind them 2 billion Muslims who continue it, you know. So geography and demography tells us that it is foretold already, the end of the Zionist colony, that it cannot last longer than the Crusader states, that definitely it cannot last longer, you know, than, and especially with the acceleration of time and technology, how things are exponential these days. So wars are shorter. So a war of decolonization today is going to be much shorter than a war of decolonization in the 1960s and 70s. And obviously, that doesn't mean that the death toll is going to be less, because the bombs and weapons are more, you know, deadly now than they were before. The final thing that I would say here is, what guarantees that the United States is going to enter this war is the interest of the US itself. Remember, the Zionist colony is just a vessel of the imperial order. And the West itself sees the end of the Zionist colony coming. And so they will most probably want to use the Zionist colony to clobber as many people before it disappears. And looking at the global situation, where the hegemon, the United States, sees itself falling from being the only hegemon, and that there is only three competitors to it: China economically, Russia economically and militarily, and the Gulf region here having the vast majority of the oil. The US, in order for it to rise again economically, it needed to at least take two of its oil and gas competitors, meaning the Gulf and or Russia, out of the market to raise the prices of oil. And that's why they started the war on Ukraine. But China, Russia, India, and OPEC Plus destroyed that plan by refusing to raise the prices of oil and gas, and by directing all of Russia's oil and gas to China and India, and that being smuggled into the market and keeping the price low. And so we see that the US right now is in a position that it may actually want Israel to attack Iran's gas and oil facilities. And it may actually want Iran to destroy the Saudi, Emirati, Qatari, Bahraini, Kuwaiti oil fields and gas fields in order, on the one hand, to raise the price of oil and gas so the American economy can revive itself, and on the other, to crash the Chinese economy because the prices will be too high on gas and oil for it to stay in competition with the United States. And finally, because a regional war means the cutting of all trade routes from the east to the west, that means all of Africa, Latin America, and Europe will become hostages to American products because Chinese products wouldn't reach them. So the United States is an evil empire. So we have to think about it in that sense when we want to analyze, will we go to war here with Iran? Will actually the US want its oil facilities to be attacked? In my opinion, they would want it to happen.
Yeah, and Lowkey, I want to bring you in here also with regard to the UK, because you've been talking much about the UK's insidious role in all of this. And when I think about all the talk that we've had here about solidarity and the resistance and what Lebanon has sacrificed, what Yemen has sacrificed, when we look at all of these fronts in solidarity with Gaza and Palestine, there's also the reality that the US and the UK and the West, of course, Israel being a satellite of that, of this imperial order, they all have interests not just in this genocide on Gaza and on Palestine, but on all of these fronts, right? Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Iran. I mean, when we look at the entirety of the picture, Lowkey, perhaps you could speak to not just the UK's role in this, but also to what Laith was saying, that we have to look at this as part of an imperial strategy, or perhaps a strategy lack thereof, but reflecting these immense interests.
So Britain and Israel have an interesting mutual outsourcing relationship, meaning that Israel outsources certain services to the British security state, and Britain outsources some to the Israelis. So, for example, Israel relies on Britain to train the Comprador Palestinian Authority, and that's carried out by private companies that are essentially outgrowths of the British Ministry of Defence and staffed by former British intelligence agents. Britain has a secret military agreement with Israel signed in 2020. We don't know the exact details of it, but actually the defence minister at the time, Ben Wallace, effectively fairly early on in the genocide in Gaza, accused Israel of committing war crimes. So you have some interesting dynamics developing in that relationship. However, in a nuts and bolts logistical sense, Britain's base in Cyprus, Akrotiri, has been the logistical hub of this war. It's only 45 minutes from Gaza, so you've had weapons flowing in there from the Germans, the Canadians, and from the Americans. Also, the British, from that base, launched the R1 Shadow spy plane, which goes over above Gaza. And from the beginning of the genocidal campaign, Britain has claimed that that plane is there for hostage rescue. But essentially, Israel is claiming its entire military campaign is about hostage rescue rather than genocide. And so therefore, if we analyze the R1 Shadow spy plane, one of its specialities is target acquisition. So it's therefore very likely that Britain has had a role in that somehow. We also know that from the base in Akrotiri, according to former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, the British are intercepting communications of the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance factions and sharing that information with both the US and the Israelis. We also know that Israeli military flights have landed in Britain throughout this war. We know that a small number of Israeli military personnel are also trained in this country by the British. We also know that Britain sent a spy squad to the Zionist entity to assist in the campaign in Gaza. And interestingly, early on, a story was published by the Rupert Murdoch-owned Sun newspaper, which stated that Britain had sent the SAS to Cyprus ready for mobilization in Gaza. Now, following that, the publishing of that article, the British government issued something called a D-notice, which is where it gives advice to media outlets not to publish a certain piece of information or not to publish for the interest of national security. And so the D-notice that was issued was that the British media should not publish stories about SAS activities in Gaza. Now, you would have no need for a D-notice on the issue if there was no SAS activity in Gaza. And even Jeremy Corbyn, the British Member of Parliament, asked the British Foreign Office if the SAS were active in Gaza, and his answer was he was refused, basically. So all likelihood is that Britain is directly involved on the ground in Gaza. We also know that there are perhaps hundreds of British citizens who are currently in the Israeli military, not only dual citizens with Israel, but also what they call lone soldiers. Let's not forget that Israel has 7,000 lone soldiers who are individuals that are not even Israeli citizens. What they do is they enter the Israeli military for 14 to 18 months, and then they go back to the societies that they come from with zero legal scrutiny, regardless of what they have done while with the Israeli military. So Britain is involved in a myriad of ways in what is happening there. We know when it comes to, for instance, the F-35, at least 15% of the fighter jet is manufactured in Britain. We also know that the nuts and bolts of the F-15s and F-16s also are there. For instance, in the F-16, you have the HUD technology, which allows the fighter jet to select targets. That is made by BAE Systems, a British aerospace giant, really. So there's plenty of ways in which Britain is involved. But what you also have on the domestic front is intense resistance, which actually differs from any other European country. So, for example, Palestine Action has succeeded in shutting down 3 Israeli sites in this country belonging to Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company. Firstly, Palestine Action succeeded in shutting the Elbit site in Oldham and forcing Elbit Systems to sell its subsidiary Ferranti Technologies at a loss. And that was prior to the genocide, years before it. It involved the mobilization of the local community around the factory. The next victory of Palestine Action, again prior to the start of genocide, was the shutting down permanently of the head office of Elbit Systems in London, which was in Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister's constituency. And that was, again, permanent. They vacated the premises. And the third victory, which was since the beginning of the genocide, was Elite KL, again, a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, which used to make cooling units for the Merkava tanks, which you may have seen destroyed on videos on the internet. Now, following the mobilization and relentless targeting by Palestine Action of that factory, Elbit Systems had to sell the subsidiary Elite KL at a loss. And so now that very factory produces cooling units for London transport, like buses. So while you are seeing the political class deeply enamored. And, you know, the level of integration with Israeli intelligence by the British is really very interesting. So, for example, you have something called the UK Israel Tech Hub in this country. This is an organization based in the British Embassy in the Zionist entity. But who is it staffed by? It's staffed by Israeli military and intelligence personnel. Who is it headed by? It's headed by the former director of the Israeli Ministry of Finance, a gentleman by the name of Haim Shani. Now, this organization is funded by the British Department of Trade, by the British Ministry of Culture, but also the British Foreign Office and the British Embassy itself. And it's based in the British Embassy. But again, it's entirely staffed by former Israeli military and intelligence personnel. Now, the stated objective of this organization is to procure public sector contracts in Britain for Israeli tech companies. And so what has that led to? It's led to a situation where Celebrite, the Israeli intelligence companies, hacks phones for the British police. It's led to a situation where NICE Systems, a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, carries out investigations for the British police. So in terms of sovereignty, you have a level of integration here, which implies that Israel has a level of access which is uneven to the British system. You even have, in the case of British Telecom, which is a key part of the infrastructure in this country, its largest shareholder is Patrick Drahi, an Israeli billionaire, very close to Netanyahu, who is the owner of I-24, the Israeli media outlet, which was the first place to air the 40 beheaded babies lie, and also was found to be acting as a proxy of Benjamin Netanyahu's political movement in a Haaretz investigation. So how is it that somebody who, just to remember, when British Telecom had this shareholder takeover by Patrick Drahi, he became the largest shareholder, it caused the British government to launch a national security investigation into that. Now, what were they investigating him for? Were they investigating him because they believe that he's an asset of Israeli intelligence? I mean, his history would certainly imply such. He also owns a channel in France, which has been found to censor pro-Palestinian views. And again, I-24 is full of former Israeli military and intelligence personnel. So you have a very interesting dynamic here between Israel and Britain. Even when you look at the very company which handles the data of the British Ministry of Defence, the British Foreign Office, the British Home Office, and the NHS, it's a company by the name of Oracle. Now, who is Oracle headed by? It's headed by Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison is one of, if not the largest donors to the Friends of the IDF in the history of that organization. And not only that, he is a close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, to the extent that Netanyahu was offered the directorship of Oracle. So you've got that right. The current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was offered the directorship of the company which handles the data of the British Ministry of Defence, the British Foreign Office, and the British Home Office. It's an affront to the idea of sovereignty. But as I said, you have significant pushback within this society, including, to this day, you have 16 political prisoners in the country who have taken part, or who are alleged to have taken part, in operations to shut down Israeli arms factories. Palestine Action, since October 7th, has launched 130 operations against Israeli military sites and sites invested in the Israeli military infrastructure and companies. And in fact, since its foundation in 2020, Palestine Action has launched around 500 operations against Israeli military company sites in this country. So there is actually significant resistance against this in Britain, thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And given that and everything you said, Lowkey, it's no wonder why it has been even more intense, this repression and this attempt to stifle, if not destroy, the resistance, more intense even in the UK than even here in the United States, where it's not as if Washington, it's not as if law enforcement, it's not as if the armed men of the state have been any less repressive. But at the same time, this resistance that you speak of has indeed brought on, it seems to be an even more intense repression. But Laith, back to the idea of this war, right? The United States and the UK. It seems like the West. You have some of this talk about arms embargo and kind of wagging their fingers. Oh, we don't like what Israel is doing necessarily. They need to. You hear Lloyd Austin say all the time, well, we need to stop. We need the diplomacy to start and the civilian targeting to stop as soon as possible, usually is the words that are used. But at the same time, it's quite clear, given the US's history, the UK's history, that if there's going to be a war in West Asia, there's going to be a war. And it seems like that's where things are heading. Now, a viewer has asked, Alan McKee, says, well, why would the US benefit from higher oil prices? So I'm curious, Laith, your understanding, if there was to be a wider war to break out, because this is where this is heading, how exactly would this not only impact the resistance on the ground, but also the rest of the world, including the United States and its junior partners, which have vested interests in the region where you reside?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Arab vessel states, the oil kingdoms that were created by the UK, they're just vessels, and I think all their money that is in the Western banks will be looted in the situation of a regional war. In fact, probably the US is not happy that they've had peace for 60 somewhat years and were able to build those glass towers in the middle of the desert. The US will be happy to return them back to tents in the desert and loot their foreign funds that are outside their country. That's what's going to happen there in the situation of full-out war. The thing is that people sometimes, wonder, why is it that the end of Israel is not looking like the end of South Africa? And I think this because some of the things that Lowkey referred to give us a hint why. The Zionist elite are fully integrated within the Western elite. In fact, right now, most Western countries, components of the imperial order, have an undeclared religion called Zionism. You can make fun of any prophet or any religion, denigrate them in those countries, but you cannot criticize Israel or the political ideology of Zionism. So they're already now the professed faith of these European Union states and the UK and Canada, the US, Australia is Zionism. And the Zionist elite are an essential part of the running of the empire, unlike the South African elite that may have had access to an important geographical point, the Cape of Good Hope, and a few diamond, mines, but they didn't offer Hollywood. They didn't offer all this intelligence, work that the Israelis are offering, and they didn't offer to keep the most important geographic crossroad in the world under control of the empire. So we see on the one hand that the West will do anything to maintain this empire, and specifically this colony that keeps them able to project force into West Asia and North Africa and control all those waterways. So they will go all the way for it. And as we see the resistance rising inside the West, and I think Palestine Action are the most important resistance movement in all of the Western territories at the moment, and they put to shame the millions of people that are just going to demonstrations instead of taking direct action like Palestine Action. And it's the only way forward to force the West to withdraw their troops from here, even if it means more repression for the populations in the West. Let it be. People should be in confrontation with the Western governments in their own territories. the least of it is so, Western countries will have to repress their own people, spend more time repressing their own people and money than sending their bombs here and intelligence work here. I would say finally that when this war breaks out, we're already seeing hints to what's going to happen to populations in the West. Today, there was a statement released by the US Treasury and the Canadian government saying that they've designated Samidoun, the Palestinian prisoner solidarity network around the world, as a terrorist organization. And they named Khalid Barakat, one of the organizers in Samidoun, who isn't even a member now of Samidoun, as a terrorist. And they have designated him as the leader of the PFLP outside Palestine. But again, he's not even a member of the PFLP. So what does this tell us? That tells us that we are, as soon as there's a regional war, as soon as there is American and British soldiers coming back in coffins, which they will, in big numbers, and as soon as these demonstrations in the streets in the West become more militant, because already we can see if there was millions of people out in the street to stop the genocide in Gaza, there's going to be millions more to stop the war across this whole swath of land, and bigger parts of the diasporas of Arabs and Muslims will be involved in that, and more people of color and more leftists will be involved in it. So what should we expect? We should be expecting the worst. We are heading towards a situation where there will be internment camps for Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and any communities and individuals that stand for the liberation of these communities. This is what it means. All these smoke signals that we're seeing with the repression against Palestine Action and the attacks on Samidoun, those are all just the beginnings of what could happen. And I personally think that, it's going to get even worse than that.
Yeah. I mean, there are historical examples of whenever the United States especially gets, but I know the UK and the Collective West have shared this history, whenever they become ingratiated in a massive war, the repression at home, the repression that happens within these countries ends up becoming even more intense than it already is, and that you both have already outlined. So that is 100% guarantee. And we should believe people like Donald Trump and even Kamala Harris, who says Iran is the biggest adversary. We should believe them when they say these things, because they do indicate and reflect, I think, a broader posture that isn't getting enough attention. And, a friend of the show, and I know both of you know her, Roddy Francis, she said something really interesting about solidarity on Twitter recently, where someone asked her, well, why do you stay in Lebanon? And I don't know, Laith, if you've been asked this question. And she said, well, or like, why do you stay in Lebanon and sacrifice so much for Palestine? And she said, well, I don't let Sykes-Picot, I don't let that define, who we are. We are all one family. So I'm curious, you guys, we have about 10 minutes. If there's anything left that you'd all want to say about what's happening here, and maybe something we've missed. But I just want to bring that up because I think it reflects maybe something that we should learn in the West, because I do see this as the resistance war, the anti-colonial war of our time. The bigger conflicts happening. Lowkey mentioned they are post-colonial. I mean, China is no longer in a colonial situation. Russia is no longer in a neo-colonial situation. They're no longer in that position. So those wars are going to be massively fought in just a massively different way. But here we are seeing, I think, the resistance war of our time. So I'm curious if there's anything we've missed. Lowkey, I'll let you start.
Well, to speak to the point about internal repression, of course, we remember in the late 1800s, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which led to all Chinese being deported from the United States, many attacked and killed on US soil. We then, of course, saw in World War II the internment of hundreds of thousands of Japanese in the US. And when you look at the pronouncements of figures like Richard Kemp, who is a former head of British forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, who is now deeply entrenched within the Israel lobby, to the extent that he's even been embedded with Israeli forces on the edge of Gaza during the Great March of Return, watching Israeli snipers shoot Palestinians in the knees and in the head and face. He has gone on record as saying that he believes there should be internment of thousands of dissenters in this society. Tommy Robinson, who has a well-documented history with the Zionist movement, the well-known racist Tommy Robinson, has also gone on record saying he believes there should be internment. So there is an existing appetite for it, and it is being pushed by Israel's advocates within this society. So I do believe that while the development of surveillance of communications, and particularly the ubiquity of the iPhone, has meant that they can trace people's activity far more successfully than any time previously. So that to some extent may remove some of the impetus to intern people physically. But I do believe that if we do go for the two bigger escalatory steps, which is war with Iran and then possibly war with Russia and or China, you will see these type of steps taken. But then here is the question, because ultimately a lot of this does return to Russia and Iran. Have to remember that in the last 100 years, Russia was, following the revolution in 1917, subject to an invasion by the British under Winston Churchill, saying he wanted to strangle the revolution in its cradle. Of course, they failed to do that. And of course, China, which was subject to 3 separate opium wars led by the British in order to force the Chinese population into addiction to opium. And then, of course, you have the US mobilization of hundreds of military bases around China. We have to push for an even more assertive position on the part of Russia and China towards the Palestinian issue. There have been positive developments, there have been positive positions taken. But in the case of Iran now, which houses Russian military installations, which also has the strategic comprehensive investment plan with China, which is hundreds of billions to be invested in Iran by China over the next decades. What will the position of these great powers, these great historic civilizations be to the violation of Iranian sovereignty, which will inevitably take place, carried out by the Israelis with a covert US role or an overt US role? What will be the response of China and Russia? This is really the decisive factor in the future of humanity, really here, and for the good of collective humanity. Will we see a greater, more assertive position taken by these great powers? I guess time will tell.
Right. Laith,
Yeah.
anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would add that clearly Russia and China don't even have to come into this war directly, because there is Belarus, there's North Korea. And what we are seeing is that if just the resistance in Gaza and the resistance in Lebanon requires the involvement of all the imperial might, what does does the US have in a confrontation with the full axis of resistance with Iran's hundreds of thousands of missiles? Okay. And today we saw North Korea blow up all the roads and trains between the south and the north. We already heard at the beginning of the genocide, President Lukashenko of Belarus saying that he is providing a nuclear umbrella to defend Iran. So we don't need direct involvement of Russia and China. But I think the most important part of all of this discussion for our viewers that are mainly in the West is that they have a duty not only for the Palestinian people and the people here in Western Asia, Northeast Africa that are fighting the whole empire on behalf of humanity. But they have a responsibility for themselves. People in Canada, the US, the UK are teetering on the edge of losing all their rights and being rounded up in internment camps like the Japanese, like the Germans in the US and Canada during World War II. And if people don't get more militant, it will be too late. And nobody, believe me, nobody is going to come and try to save our communities locked up in internment camps in the UK from far away. It is our duty, the communities, our diaspora communities, and those who support liberation and are anti-imperialists to prepare so this eventuality doesn't come like a surprise when it does happen. Follow the lead of Palestine Action. Don't get distracted with the lights of elections that are already foretold. Even our brothers and sisters that are fighting for the Green Party in the US. I'm like, I mean, it's already foretold. Right. So you might as well put your time and efforts and money into direct action, into forcing the state to back down from the edge of the abyss.
Yeah, and I'll just make a few points before I give it back to you guys, just for anything that you want to highlight and promote to the audience. I'll just say this. Well, on the question of Russia, China, Iran, it's very interesting because I think both of your points, your main points, actually go together, where we have a situation, if the U.S., in my estimation, if the U.S. and Israel do try to conduct a legitimate regime change operation on Iran, I just don't see Russia standing back. China, may have a less direct role and a less direct need to get involved. But I don't see, given the calculus that has been made over the years by Russia, even with regard, if we look at Syria, that they would let that happen, just because there would be just catastrophic consequences. So that's, I think, why when we talk about, will there be World War #3, I always hesitate to say World War III because it will look so much different than the prior two world wars. But if there's going to be a major global confrontation, I think a regime change operation that is legitimately threatening the political system of Iran, I just don't see how these two countries stand back, given how catastrophic it would be for the world. But at the same time, to your point, Laith, I think it is also true and very interesting that we are in a position where we are seeing the U.S. and Israel and, of course, the Western empire not in the position really to dictate terms as they generally do, or they generally try to do, meaning that we have perhaps a situation where, the rise of Russia, the rise of China, they can focus on, and I think Iran also wants to focus on these things, right? Focus on the multipolar world, focus on building a new system of development that is not based on war, that is based on sovereignty and self-determination, to be able to build still the kind of tracks for that road, the path toward that road. And I think we're seeing this balancing act occur, and it can be both frustrating but also incredibly inspiring. And then on the point, Lowkey, on the repression too, both of you have hit on the repression. We haven't even talked about like the anti-communist repression, the labor repression. Like each and every time there are major wars during like the Second World War, for example, First World War II, the U.S. in particular, passing major laws to just target anyone who resists, who speaks up against these wars, who speaks up for their rights on any level, economic, political, etc. We just have so many examples of that, and it's happening right now. It's happening right now as we speak. People are being raided, they're being prosecuted, they're being sent to jail. I know there are people who have been inspired by Palestine Action right here in the United States who have tried to do similar actions, and one of them, I believe, Kala Walsh, she's going to be doing prison time because of it. So there's major repression all across the board, and we should expect it to get worse as this wider war moves forward. But with all of that, Laith and Lowkey, please do provide the audience where people can find your work and what you're up to and what they should be checking out. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, you can find us on freepalestine.video. We're on 10 almost platforms, or on Twitter, others. So all the links are available on the website. Please donate. We have reporters down in the West Bank, down in Lebanon here, workers in Syria, producers across the region. And we're bringing content in English from these seldom covered areas. It would, we depend on donations and your goodwill of the viewers. Visit us at freepalestine.video.
You can check us out at Mint Press News. Also, I have an album coming out on October 28th, so please do check that out. I'll be on tour in the UK from November 1st, so hope to see you there.
Amazing. Yes, everyone should definitely check that out. Follow Lowkey on social media, because that album, you're listening to a fan here, someone who has been listening to Lowkey since the Obama era. So definitely check that out. If you're in the UK, check out his tour. Definitely also, we have Lowkey's social media in the video description. We also have Laith's website, which connects directly to Free Palestine TV, where you can donate and support their work. But with all that said, everyone, that's the end of today's stream. I want to thank Lowkey and Laith Marouf for coming on today. It was a great stream, and we're going to head out of here. Thanks for all the super chats that you provided. That's really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who viewed. Thanks to all the moderators doing all your great work to make the chat a great place for conversation. And of course, go to the video description where you can find Laith and Lowkey's work, as well as where you can support this channel here. I'll be back soon, I believe in a couple days. I will announce who is coming on. Then the video description is all the places where you can support, and I will see you in a couple days. Peace out.